The clerk refused her request and mocked her dog. The biker heard everything. The glass door whispered shut behind them. A pair of canvas shoes, soles worn nearly smooth, stopped on the polished tile. Inside the artisan bakery, the scent of butter and caramelized sugar hung thick in the air. Melanie Anderson swallowed hard, her throat dry, but she forced herself forward. Beside her, the German Shepherd stayed close to her side. His coat had dulled from lack of proper nutrition. His amber eyes tracked the baker behind the counter, waiting, measuring. Melanie's knuckles went white around the worn leather leash. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. Excuse me, sir. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The baker didn't look up from arranging croissants in the display case. His movements were precise, theatrical, designed to make her wait. Do you have any day-old bread? For my dog. The man's hand stilled. He turned slowly, his gaze sliding from Melanie's hollow cheeks to the German Shepherd at her side. A smile curved his mouth, but it held no warmth. Day-old? He let out a short, cruel laugh. We donate that to the shelter at closing. Company policy. His eyes dropped to Shep, and something ugly flickered across his face. And that mangy thing shouldn't even be in here. Health codes, child. Can't you read the sign? Melanie's face flushed hot. Her shoulders drew inward like she was trying to disappear. He's not mangy, she whispered. He's just what? A street mutt you're dragging around, begging? The baker's voice rose, performative, meant to be heard. I don't sell scraps to beggars. And I don't allow filthy animals in my establishment. Out. Now. Melanie's grip tightened on the leash. Shep pressed closer, sensing her distress, a low whine building in his throat. She took a half step backward, her vision blurring. The bakery suddenly felt too bright, too clean, too full of abundance she could never touch. Somewhere behind her, near the corner table by the window, a heavy boot scraped against tile. The sound was deliberate. Final. Someone had stood up. The introduction, the witness. Michael Stokes had forgotten what it felt like to care. 3 years. 3 years since he'd walked away from the boardroom, the penthouse, the carefully constructed empire of quarterly profits and strategic layoffs. 3 years since he'd traded his Armani suits for leather and denim, his corner office for anonymous motels and open highway. 3 years of training himself to observe without engaging, to witness without intervening, to feel nothing. But he hadn't stopped looking. He'd watched the girl enter, the way her hand trembled on the leash, the way the dog stayed pressed against her leg like a living shield. He'd seen the moment her face changed when the baker spoke. The way shame painted her cheeks crimson. The way her shoulders collapsed inward like she was absorbing a physical blow. And then the baker's words, loud enough for everyone to hear, I don't sell scraps to beggars. And I don't allow filthy animals in my establishment. Michael's jaw tightened. The girl was already turning to leave, her head bowed, her hand moving to wipe quickly at her eyes. The dog looked back once, not at the baker, but at Michael. The amber eyes held something ancient and knowing, a question without words. Are you going to let this happen? Michael's hands pressed flat against the table. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten. The newspaper in front of him might as well have been blank. He stood. The chair legs scraped loud against the tile, cutting through the bakery's ambient noise like a knife. The baker glanced up, irritation flashing across his face. Michael didn't look at him. Not yet. His boots were heavy on the floor as he crossed the space in 4 long strides, positioning himself between the girl and the door. He stopped, turned, and finally, slowly, deliberately, let his gaze settle on the baker. The man's smugness faltered. Just for a second. Just long enough. Michael walked to the counter. He still didn't glance at the girl, didn't acknowledge her presence. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of boardroom warfare. I'll take everything you have from yesterday. Every loaf. Every roll. Every pastry you were planning to donate. He paused, letting the word land with all its implied judgment. Box it up. The baker blinked. Sir, and I'll take today's fresh sourdough. All 3 loaves behind you. The olive bread. Those. Michael gestured to the artisan baguettes. The cinnamon rolls. The whole basket of croissants. That's nearly $200 worth. Michael pulled a wallet from his jacket. He counted out bills, crisp hundreds, and placed them deliberately on the glass counter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 500. Keep whatever's left. His eyes never left the baker's face. Consider it payment for a lesson in basic human decency. Though I doubt you'll learn it. The silence in the bakery was absolute. Even the espresso machine had stopped hissing. The baker's face had gone from pink to white. His hands shook slightly as he began pulling items from the display case, stuffing them into bags with none of his earlier precision. Michael turned. Finally looked at the girl. She stood frozen, her eyes too wide for her thin face. The dog had moved slightly in front of her, protective, tail motionless. Michael watched him work. Didn't rush him. Let the silence stretch and tighten like a wire. When the last bag was packed, the baker shoved them across the counter with more force than necessary. A defensive gesture. A small rebellion against his own humiliation. Michael picked up the bag slowly. Deliberately. Then he leaned forward, just slightly, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. The kind of voice that made boardroom executives go pale. The kind of voice that ended careers. You just lost a customer for life. He paused, let the word settle. But you gained a moment of self-reflection. I doubt you'll use it. The baker's jaw worked. His face flushed with impotent rage, but he said nothing. What could he say? His own cruelty had been laid bare, witnessed, judged, and found wanting. Michael turned. Finally looked at the girl. She stood frozen, her eyes too wide for her thin face. The dog had moved slightly in front of her, protective, tail motionless. Michael held the bags out to her, his voice softening just fractionally. Your dog can eat this. He paused, his jaw working. And you? I figure you could use some too. Melanie's hands shook as she reached for the bags. Her fingers brushed the paper, then clutched them against her chest like she was afraid they might vanish. Her lower lip trembled. She bit down hard, fighting to hold herself together. I can't. You can, Michael said quietly. And you will. Chapter 2, A Glimmer of Hope. Michael turned back to the counter. The baker was still standing there, gripping the edge of the display case like it might anchor him. His knuckles had gone white. We're done here, Michael said. Not loud. Didn't need to be. You can go back to your croissants. The baker's mouth opened. Closed. He retreated toward the kitchen without another word, disappearing through the swinging door like a man grateful for an exit. The bakery felt larger suddenly. Emptier. Just Michael, the girl, and the dog standing in the too bright afternoon light filtering through the windows. Michael moved slowly, deliberately telegraphing every motion. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with Melanie's. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her young face. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. What's your name? His voice had lost its edge, softened into something almost gentle. Melanie. She clutched the bags tighter. Melanie Anderson. Michael Stokes. He glanced at the dog. And this is? Shep. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward at his name. His amber eyes studied Michael with an intelligence that was almost unsettling. Waiting. Measuring. Michael reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Melanie tensed, her body angling protectively in front of Shep. Smart kid. Too many lessons learned too young. Easy, Michael said. Just getting my wallet again. He pulled out a 20, then gestured to the refrigerated case near the register where premium dog treats sat in neat rows. Organic. Grain-free. The kind that cost more than some people's meals. Pick one for him. Whatever he'd like. Melanie stared at the bill like it might vanish. I can't. You can. Michael pressed the money into her hand, closing her fingers around it. He protected you. He deserves something good. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard, fighting it, but a single tear traced down her cheek anyway. She wiped it away quickly, almost angry at herself for the weakness. She chose a package of beef strips. High-quality stuff. Shep's tail moved once when she held it up for him to see. Michael stood, his knees protesting the movement. Getting old. Or maybe just feeling old. Your father, he said quietly. You mentioned his sick. Melanie's face closed down. Instinctive protection. It's nothing. We're managing. Doesn't look like nothing. Michael kept his voice level, non-judgmental. 2 weeks without real food. That's not managing. That's surviving. Her jaw tightened. Pride warring with desperation. He recognized the battle. Had fought it himself once, in a different context, with different stakes. Shep needs to eat, she said finally. If something happens to my dad, Shep is all I'll have left. The words hit Michael square in the chest. Simple. Devastating. Honest. He saw it then. Not just the exhaustion or the hunger. The dignity. The way she stood straight despite everything. The way she'd asked for help, not for herself, but for her dog. The way she prioritized a loyal animal over her own empty stomach. Something cracked open inside him. A memory he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. A boardroom. A young woman, newly divorced, pleading to keep her health insurance for her son's treatments. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Cost-benefit analysis. His signature on the termination letter. He'd made the practical choice. The financially sound choice. The choice that haunted him every single day since. Michael looked at Melanie. Really looked. Saw what he'd failed to see 3 years ago in that boardroom. Saw the human cost of turning away. Where do you live? He asked. Fear flickered across her face. I'm not. He stopped. Started again. That food will last maybe a week. Then you're right back here. And that bastard will still be behind his counter. Melanie studied his face. Whatever she found there must have satisfied something because she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Chapter 3, The Ghost of the Past. Michael picked up the bags. The paper crinkled under his grip, heavy with bread and pastries and the weight of a decision he couldn't take back. Not that he wanted to. Lead the way, he said. Melanie nodded. She moved toward the door with Shep pressed against her leg, both of them walking with that careful efficiency born of necessity. Every step calculated. Every movement designed to conserve energy that neither could afford to waste. Michael followed them out into the afternoon sun. The warmth hit his face, almost aggressive after the air-conditioned chill of the bakery. Traffic hummed past on the main street. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the small tragedy that had just played out over day-old bread. They walked 3 blocks. Then turned down a side street where the pavement cracked and buckled, where chain-link fences replaced white picket, where the houses grew smaller and closer together. Melanie didn't look back. Didn't check if he was still following. Just walked with her head up, her shoulders square, refusing to be ashamed of where she lived. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. Single story. Pale blue paint peeling in long strips that exposed gray wood underneath. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, like a spine under too much weight. A rusty chain-link fence enclosed a yard of patchy grass and bare dirt. The mailbox leaned at an angle, held up by hope more than structural integrity. Michael stopped at the gate. This was poverty. Not the sanitized version you saw in charity commercials. Not the noble struggling that made for good redemption stories. This was the real thing. The kind that wore you down slowly, stripping away dignity one unpaid bill at a time. He'd seen numbers like this before. Statistics. Demographics. Market segments that weren't worth pursuing because their lifetime customer value didn't justify the acquisition cost. But he'd never stood at the gate. The memory hit him without warning. Sharp. Visceral. A conference room on the 43rd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 6 vice presidents around a mahogany table. PowerPoint slides glowing on the screen. Employee restructuring. Efficiency optimization. Headcount reduction. These positions represent redundancy in our current operational model. His own voice, steady and professional, as he'd clicked through slides. Names reduced to ID numbers. People reduced to salary costs. Lives reduced to line items that could be eliminated with a keystroke. Margaret Chen. 22 years with the company. Husband recently deceased. 2 kids in college. Her skill set is outdated. Training costs would exceed replacement value. James Morrison. Single father. Daughter with cerebral palsy. His attendance record shows too many personal days. Liability concern. Sarah Williams. Newly divorced. Son in treatment for leukemia. Healthcare costs in her department are significantly above average. He'd made the recommendations. Signed off on the terminations. Went home to his penthouse and slept soundly because the numbers made sense. The logic was airtight. The shareholders would be pleased. 3 months later, he'd seen Sarah Williams' name in the news. Fundraiser for her son. Community rallying to help. He'd read the article on his phone while his assistant brought him his 3rd espresso of the morning. He'd felt nothing. That was when he knew something inside him had broken. Or maybe it had always been broken, and he'd finally noticed. Michael stared at Melanie's house. At the peeling paint and sagging roof and chain-link fence. At the physical manifestation of every decision he'd ever made in that 43rd floor conference room. This was where those numbers lived. This was what redundancy and optimization and acceptable losses looked like when you stripped away the corporate language and faced the truth. Melanie had opened the gate. She stood waiting, Shep at her side, both of them watching him with identical expressions. Patient. Wary. Used to disappointment. You coming? Her voice was small but steady. Michael's hands tightened on the bags. The bread inside rustled. Reminder of what he was carrying. Reminder of why he was here. Yeah, he said. His voice came out rough. Yeah, I'm coming. He stepped through the gate. Chapter 4, The Shad Look. The front door stuck in its frame. Melanie had to lean her shoulder into it, push hard, before it scraped open across warped floorboards. The sound echoed through the small house like a warning. Inside, the air was close. Stale. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, leaving everything in a dim gray light that made the space feel smaller than it was. A couch with cushions compressed into permanent body-shaped depressions. A coffee table with water rings and scratches. A television older than Melanie, its screen dark and dusty. Dad. Melanie's voice was soft. Careful. I brought someone. Movement from the back room. Slow. Labored. Then a man appeared in the doorway. Thomas Anderson looked like he'd been carved from something that used to be solid and had started to crumble. Tall once, maybe. Broad-shouldered. But illness had hollowed him out, left him gaunt and stooped. His flannel shirt hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight too quickly. His face was gray. Not pale, gray. The color of someone whose body was using everything it had just to keep moving. But it was his eyes that stopped Michael cold. He'd seen that look before. In the mirror. Every morning for 3 years. It wasn't pain, exactly. Not physical suffering. It was deeper than that. Quieter. It was the look of a man who'd stopped expecting anything good to happen. Who'd made peace with disappointment. Who'd learned to survive on the thin edge between giving up and keeping going, not because he had hope, but because he had a daughter who needed him to. The 1,000-yard stare, soldiers called it. That distance in someone's eyes when they'd seen too much. Felt too much. Lost too much. Thomas Anderson had it. Not from war. From poverty. From illness. From watching his child go hungry while he was too sick to fix it. Michael knew that stare intimately. Had worn it himself for 3 years, though his version came from different wounds. Self-inflicted ones. The kind that came from looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger who traded his humanity for quarterly profits. Dad, this is Michael. Melanie set the bags on the coffee table, her hands still shaking slightly. He helped us. At the bakery. Thomas's gaze moved to Michael. Measured him. The way men do when they're trying to figure out if someone's a threat or an opportunity or just another disappointment waiting to happen. Thomas Anderson. His voice was rough. Unused. He didn't offer his hand. Couldn't, maybe. Or had learned that some gestures cost more energy than they were worth. Michael Stokes. Silence settled. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Melanie pulled bread from the bags, her movements quick and efficient. Already cataloging what they had. Already planning how to make it last. Shep sat at her feet, his amber eyes moving between the 3 humans, reading the tension like a language. I used to run a company, Michael said abruptly. The words came out harder than he intended. Operations. Logistics. I was good at fixing broken systems. Thomas's expression didn't change. That right? Not a question. A statement. Flat. The tone of a man who'd heard plenty of promises before. I left 3 years ago. Couldn't stomach it anymore. Michael paused. Forced himself to say the truth. I made decisions that hurt people. Good people. People like you. And I did it because the numbers made sense, and I told myself that was enough. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just exhaustion. Why are you here? Thomas asked. Because I'm tired of running. Michael met his gaze. Held it. And because your daughter has more dignity in her little finger than I had in my entire corporate career. Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked at Melanie, who'd frozen with a loaf of bread in her hands. I don't need charity, Thomas said quietly. Good. I'm not offering it. Michael shifted his weight. I'm offering you a job. The words hung in the air. Thomas blinked. A job. I've got money. More than I need. More than I deserve. Michael's voice was steady now. Certain. But I don't have a purpose. And you need work. So we help each other. I'm sick, Thomas said flatly. I can barely stand for more than an hour. Then you'll work sitting down. Bookkeeping. Planning. Organization. Whatever you can manage. Michael pulled out his phone. Old habit. I'll pay you fair wages. Not charity. Not handouts. Work. Thomas stared at him. That 1,000-yard stare cracking just slightly. Just enough to let something else through. Something that might have been hope, if hope hadn't been beaten out of him months ago. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Michael thought of Sarah Williams. Of Margaret Chen. Of James Morrison. Of every name he'd reduced to a number. Because someone should have done this for the people I hurt, he said. And I can't fix the past. But maybe I can do better now. Chapter 5. A different kind of investment. Michael's motorcycle rumbled to life in the Andersons' driveway. The sound was too loud, too aggressive for the quiet street. He'd left cash on their coffee table, enough for groceries, utilities, breathing room. Thomas had protested weakly. Melanie had stared at the bills like they might disappear if she blinked. He'd promised to return tomorrow. To discuss the job. To figure out next steps. Now he twisted the throttle and rode away before either of them could see the uncertainty in his face. The rental cabin sat 15 miles outside town. Not really a cabin, more like a converted garage behind someone's main house. Cheap. Anonymous. The kind of place that didn't ask questions and didn't expect answers. A single room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a bed that sagged in the middle. Perfect for a man who'd convinced himself he didn't deserve better. Michael killed the engine. The silence rushed in, thick and oppressive. Inside, he dropped his keys on the counter. Pulled a beer from the mini-fridge. Didn't open it. Just stood there holding the cold bottle, staring at nothing. The cash he'd left would last them 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if they were careful. And they would be careful. People like the Andersons knew how to stretch $1 until it screamed. But then what? The job offer. Fair wages for bookkeeping work. It sounded good when he'd said it. Noble, even. But Thomas was sick. Really sick. The kind of sick that didn't get better with good intentions and steady paychecks. Medical bills were probably drowning them. Prescriptions they couldn't afford. Treatments they were skipping. A job wouldn't fix that. Not fast enough. Michael set down the beer. Pulled out his phone. The screen glowed in the dim room, too bright, almost accusatory. He hadn't checked his portfolio in 3 years. Hadn't wanted to. The money sat there earning interest, compounding, growing like a tumor he couldn't cut out. Blood money. That's what it felt like. Every dollar earned from decisions that had destroyed lives. His thumb hovered over the banking app. He opened it. The numbers loaded. Investments. Stocks. Bonds. Real estate holdings he'd forgotten about. Dividends depositing automatically every quarter. 7 figures. Comfortable. More than comfortable. Meaningless. He'd run from this. From the wealth and what it represented. From the man he'd been when he'd accumulated it. He'd convinced himself that poverty was penance. That living in a converted garage and riding from town to town was somehow atonement for the harm he'd caused. But it wasn't. It was just another form of cowardice. Another way of avoiding responsibility. Thomas Anderson's face floated in his mind. That 1,000-yard stare. The quiet defeat. The father trying desperately to stay alive long enough to make sure his daughter would be okay when he was gone. Michael had created men like Thomas. Not directly. Not personally. But through 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 cost-benefit analyses, 1,000 signatures on termination letters. He'd built a career on efficiency and optimization, and somewhere along the way he'd forgotten that every number represented a human being. A human being like Thomas. Like Melanie. Like Sarah Williams and her son fighting leukemia. He couldn't undo the past. Couldn't bring back the jobs he'd eliminated or restore the lives he'd upended. But he could do this. Michael sat down at the small table. Opened his laptop. The screen cast blue light across his face as it powered up. He pulled up spreadsheets. Financial projections. Cost analyses. The same tools he'd used to dismantle lives, now repurposed. Investment in medical care, specialists, treatments, medications. Educational fund for Melanie, college, vocational training, whatever path she chose. Housing assistance, repairs, property taxes, utilities covered long-term. Income stability, not a job for Thomas, but a trust fund structured to provide steady payments without the stigma of charity. His fingers moved across the keyboard. Muscle memory from another life. The executive he'd been, the skills he'd honed, all of it coming back. But different now. Focused not on profit margins but on sustainability. Not on shareholder value but on human dignity. This wasn't a handout. It was an investment. The only investment that had ever actually mattered. He worked through the night. When the sun rose, he had a plan. A real one. One last project. One honest use of everything he'd learned in that 43rd floor conference room. Setting the Andersons free. Chapter 6. The First Meeting. Michael knocked on the door at 10 in the morning. Earlier than yesterday but not early enough to seem desperate or intrusive. The kind of timing that suggested purpose. Intent. Melanie opened the door. She'd clearly been awake for hours. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her face scrubbed clean. She wore the same clothes as yesterday, no other options, probably, but they'd been washed. Still damp in places. Dried overnight on a rack somewhere. Mr. Stokes. Her voice was careful. Guarded. Michael. He held up his hands, showing what he'd brought. No bags of bread. No cash. Just a leather portfolio and a yellow legal pad. Can I come in? She hesitated. Glanced back into the house. Her father must have been resting. Or listening. Probably both. Okay, she said finally, stepping aside. The living room looked different in daylight. Still shabby, still worn, but cleaner than he'd expected. Someone had been keeping up appearances despite everything. Pride was a powerful thing. Sometimes the only thing left. Michael sat on the couch without waiting for an invitation. Not rude, just comfortable. Treating this like what it was, a business meeting. Melanie perched on the edge of the armchair across from him. Shep settled at her feet, eyes tracking Michael's every movement. I spent last night working. Michael opened the portfolio. Pulled out printed spreadsheets. Charts. Projections. Looking at your situation. What you need. What's sustainable. Melanie's eyes darted to the papers. Numbers everywhere. Her expression shifted, confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. I don't understand. You will. Michael set the first sheet on the coffee table. This is what most people do when they see someone struggling. They give money. Buy groceries. Pay a bill. Feels good. Helps for a minute. Then the problem comes right back. He tapped the paper with his finger. That's a band-aid. I'm not interested in band-aids. Melanie leaned forward slightly. Still wary but listening now. Really listening. Your father is sick. Medical bills are crushing you. You're missing school to take care of him. You're rationing food. You're one emergency away from losing everything. Michael's voice was matter-of-fact. Not cruel. Just honest. That's the reality, right? She nodded slowly. Her jaw tightened. So here's what we're going to do. He pulled out another sheet. This one had timelines. Action items. We're going to build you a foundation. Something that doesn't depend on my money or anyone's charity. Something sustainable. I don't know how. I know you don't. That's why I'm here. Michael met her eyes. I'm going to teach you. Silence. Shep's tail thumped once against the floor. Teach me what? Melanie's voice was barely a whisper. Everything. How money works. How to budget. How to invest. How to create income streams that last. How to build security so you never have to beg for day-old bread again. He paused. Let the words land. I'm not giving you fish, Melanie. I'm going to teach you how to buy the whole damn fishing fleet. Her eyes widened. She looked at the papers scattered on the table. At the charts and numbers that probably looked like a foreign language. Why? The question came out broken. Desperate. Why would you do this? Michael thought of Sarah Williams. Of Thomas Anderson's 1,000-yard stare. Of 3 years running from his own reflection. Because I spent 15 years teaching people how to maximize profits. How to cut costs. How to make numbers look good on paper while real people suffered. His throat tightened. I was good at it. Really good. And it destroyed something in me. He gestured to the papers. This is me using those same skills for something that actually matters. Teaching you how to survive. How to thrive. How to make sure that when your father, he stopped. Started again. How to make sure you're never vulnerable like this again. Melanie's eyes filled. She blinked hard, fighting it. I'm 16. I know. Michael's voice softened just slightly. Which means you've got time. Time to learn. Time to build. Time to become someone who never has to ask for help because you'll know how to help yourself. He pulled out a pen. Set it on the table next to the legal pad. So, are you ready to learn? Melanie stared at the pen. At the blank pages waiting to be filled. At the future Michael was offering, not as a gift, but as a challenge. She reached out. Picked up the pen. Yes, she said. Her hand didn't shake. Chapter 7, The Confrontation, Climax. 3 days later, Michael was leaving the Anderson house when he saw the silver sedan parked across the street. Too clean for the neighborhood. Too new. The engine was running. The baker sat behind the wheel. Michael stopped at the gate. Waited. His body language was relaxed, but his mind had already catalogued exits, angles, threats. Old instincts from a different kind of warfare. The car door opened. The baker stepped out, adjusting his jacket. He dressed up for this. Pressed slacks. Button-down shirt. Like he was going to a meeting. Like this was business. Mr. Stokes. The baker's voice carried across the street. Loud enough to be heard. Loud enough to reclaim some of the dignity he'd lost 3 days ago. Michael didn't respond. Just watched him approach. The baker stopped a few feet away. Close enough to be confrontational. Not close enough to be stupid. You cost me customers. The words came out tight. Rehearsed. People heard about what happened. They're calling me names. Saying I'm cruel. Heartless. His face flushed. You had no right. I had every right. Michael's voice was quiet. Flat. I was a customer. I bought your bread. What I did with it after was none of your business. You humiliated me. No. Michael took a step forward. The baker flinched. You humiliated yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. The baker's hands clenched. That girl is a beggar. That dog is filthy. I have standards. I have a business to protect. You have a small life, Michael said. And you're terrified someone might see how small it really is. So you kick down. You target a hungry kid and her sick father because it makes you feel big. Feel powerful. He paused. Let the word sink in. But you're not powerful. You're just cruel. And cruelty is what weak men do when they're desperate to feel strong. The baker's face went red. Who the hell do you think you are? Someone who used to be exactly like you. Michael's voice dropped lower. Harder. I spent 15 years in a tower making decisions that hurt people. I told myself it was business. Just numbers. Just necessary. But it wasn't. It was cowardice dressed up as pragmatism. He gestured toward the Anderson house. That girl in there? She's got more courage in her little finger than I had in my entire career. She asked for help. Stood her ground. Refused to be ashamed. Michael's jaw tightened. And you tried to crush her for it. Just like I crushed people for years. The only difference is, I eventually looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. The baker's mouth opened. Closed. Nothing came out. Go back to your bakery, Michael said. Go back to your perfect displays and your expensive bread. Go back to pretending that treating people like garbage makes you better than them. He turned away. But don't ever come near this family again. Or what? The baker's voice cracked slightly. Trying for bravado. Missing by miles. Michael looked back over his shoulder. Or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. Not through violence. Not through threats. Just through truth. I'll tell them what you said to a hungry 16-year-old girl. Let them decide if they want to give you their business. The baker stood frozen. His rehearsed confrontation had collapsed into something ugly and exposed. Michael walked back to the Andersons' door. Knocked twice. Melanie opened it. Saw the baker across the street. Her body tensed. It's okay, Michael said quietly. He's leaving. The baker got back in his car. The engine revved too loud. He pulled away fast, tires squealing slightly. Running. Melanie watched him go. He came here because of us. No. Michael turned to face her. He came here because of me. Because I held up a mirror and he didn't like what he saw. She looked up at him. Those eyes too old for her face. Too tired. But something else there now. Something that hadn't been there 3 days ago. Why are you really doing this? She asked. The teaching. The planning. All of it. Michael was quiet for a long moment. The words he'd been avoiding for 3 years sat in his throat, sharp and necessary. I left a good life because I was selfish and scared, he said finally. I saw what I'd become and I ran. Told myself I was being noble. Being honest. But I was just hiding. He paused. Met her eyes. I saw you stand up to that man, and I realized I'm done running away. My old life is going to pay for your new one. I'm not walking away anymore. Melanie's eyes filled. A single tear traced down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Michael said. We've got work to do. Chapter 8. The Transformation. 6 months changed everything. Thomas Anderson stood in the backyard without needing to lean against anything. Still thin. Still worn. But upright. The color had returned to his face, not healthy exactly, but human again. Alive. He was planting tomatoes, his hands steady in the soil, while Shep watched from the shade of the newly repaired porch. The house looked different too. New roof. Fresh paint, still pale blue, but vibrant now instead of peeling. The fence had been straightened. The mailbox stood vertical. Small changes. Dignified ones. The kind that said people lived here who had hope for tomorrow. Michael watched from the driveway. His motorcycle was parked beside a used pickup truck. Practical, reliable, the kind of vehicle you bought when you were planning to stay somewhere. Mr. Stokes. Melanie emerged from the house carrying a ledger. Not the yellow legal pad anymore. A proper business ledger. She'd filled 3 of them already. Michael, he corrected for the 100th time. She smiled. That was new too. 6 months ago, she'd barely known how to smile. Now it came easier. Not constantly. But when it came, it was real. The community garden project cleared $1,500 this month, she said, settling onto the porch steps. After expenses. Mr. Chen wants to expand to the lot on 4th Street. Michael sat beside her. Looked over the numbers. Clean. Organized. She'd learned fast. The community garden had been her idea. Well, his idea, her execution. Using donated land, selling produce at the farmer's market, employing local people who needed work. Small scale. Sustainable. The kind of enterprise that wouldn't make anyone rich but would keep multiple families fed and employed. Thomas ran the operations. Melanie handled the books. Michael provided oversight and startup capital from the portfolio he'd spent 15 years building. Blood money, he'd thought once. But blood could fertilize new growth. Could nourish something better than what had come before. Mr. Chen's a smart man, Michael said. What do you think? I think we need to run projections first. See if the demand supports 2 locations. She paused. Looked at him. You taught me that. You learned it. She flipped through pages covered in her neat handwriting. Financial projections. Cost analyses. Risk assessments. The same tools he'd used to dismantle lives, now in her hands, being used to build them. The property on Maple Street, she said carefully. You bought it. I did. You're staying. Not a question. An observation. Michael looked out at the yard. At Thomas working in the garden. At Shep sleeping peacefully in the shade. At the neighborhood around them, small houses, struggling families, people doing their best with what they had. Yeah, he said. I'm staying. 6 months ago, this would have felt like defeat. Like settling. Like accepting that he'd never reclaimed the life he'd run from. Now it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. The property on Maple Street was small. A workshop space with an apartment above it. Nothing fancy. But enough to establish what Melanie had started calling Stokes Consulting, though he'd insisted they remove his name. People didn't need to know who was behind it. They just needed to know someone was willing to help them build something sustainable. 3 families so far. Small businesses. Community projects. Nothing that would show up in Forbes or impress his former colleagues. But Thomas Anderson was alive. Melanie was learning. Shep had gained weight and his coat had regained its luster. And Michael Stokes slept through the night for the first time in 3 years. My father wants to thank you, Melanie said quietly. He doesn't know how. He doesn't need to. He says you saved our lives. Michael shook his head. I just stopped running from mine. They sat in silence. The afternoon sun was warm. Somewhere down the street, children were playing. Normal sounds. Everyday sounds. The kind he'd never noticed from his 43rd floor office. What happens when I don't need you anymore? Melanie asked. Her voice was small. Uncertain. Michael looked at her. 16 years old. Nearly 17 now. Still thin but filling out. Still tired but less haunted. Still carrying too much responsibility but learning how to distribute the weight. Then you'll teach someone else, he said. Pass it forward. That's how this works. She nodded slowly. Understanding. And you? I'll find someone else who needs help. He stood, stretched. That's the thing about places like this. There's always someone who needs help. And I've got skills. Time. Money I don't deserve but can use better than I did before. Melanie stood too. Impulsively, quickly, she hugged him. Brief. Tight. Then stepped back, embarrassed. Thank you, she whispered. Michael's throat tightened. Get back to work. Those projections won't run themselves. She smiled. Went back inside. Michael walked to his motorcycle. Didn't start it. Just stood there in the driveway of the house he'd helped save, in the neighborhood he decided to call home, under the same sun that had watched him run for 3 years. He wasn't running anymore. And for the first time since he'd signed Sarah Williams' termination letter, Michael Stokes felt like he might actually deserve to be alive. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Client, Resolution and Cliffhanger. Michael sat in the corner booth of Rita's Diner, a place that served coffee strong enough to strip paint and breakfast at any hour. The vinyl seat was patched with duct tape. The menu hadn't changed since 1987. It was perfect. He was reviewing Melanie's latest projections when the sound cut through the ambient diner noise. Not loud. Just wrong. A purr of expensive machinery that didn't belong on this street. The black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to the curb outside. Pristine. Gleaming. The kind of car that cost more than most of the houses on this block. Michael's pen stopped moving. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Tailored charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000. Heels that clicked against the pavement with precise authority. Blonde hair pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. She moved like someone who'd never doubted her right to any space she occupied. Michael knew that walk. Had watched it cross boardrooms and conference halls for 8 years. Victoria Stokes. His ex-wife. Senior partner at Stokes and Chen Holdings, the company they'd built together before everything fell apart. She paused at the diner's entrance. Scanned the interior through the window. Her eyes found him immediately. Of course they did. She'd always been able to locate him in a room. Used to say it was instinct. He'd thought it was love once. He'd been wrong about a lot of things. Victoria pushed through the door. Every head in the diner turned. She was impossibly out of place, designer clothes in a room full of work boots and flannel. But she moved through the space like she owned it, heels clicking against linoleum, until she stood at his booth. Michael. Her voice was cool. Professional. The same tone she'd used in their final divorce proceedings. You're a difficult man to find. That was intentional. I'm aware. She slid into the seat across from him without asking. Set a leather attaché case on the table between them. 3 years. No contact. No forwarding address. Your attorney wouldn't return my calls. Again. Intentional. Her eyes flicked to the papers spread in front of him. The projections. The ledgers. Her expression didn't change but something flickered there. Recognition. Understanding. Still playing corporate savior? She gestured to his work. Just with a different demographic now. I'm not playing anything. No? Victoria opened the attaché case. Pulled out a folder. Set it precisely in front of him. Because from where I'm sitting, you're doing exactly what you always did. Finding broken things and fixing them. You just swapped billion-dollar companies for charity cases. Michael didn't touch the folder. What do you want, Victoria? To talk about our settlement. She leaned back. Studied him with those sharp, assessing eyes that had once looked at him with something resembling affection. Specifically, the assets you've been liquidating. The real estate sales. The stock transfers. The rather substantial charitable donations. His jaw tightened. That's my money. Technically, it's our money. Community property, remember? The divorce decree specified equal distribution. Her smile was cold. Sharp. But you disappeared before we could finalize the details. Left quite a bit unresolved. I gave you the company. The house. You gave me your half of an empire and then vanished like a coward. Her voice stayed level. Professional. But the words cut. I've spent 3 years cleaning up your mess. Restructuring. Rebuilding trust with clients you abandoned. And now I discover you're out here playing Robin Hood with assets that are legally half mine. Michael looked at her. really looked. She hadn't changed. Still immaculate. Still controlled. Still treating human lives like line items on a balance sheet. Still everything he'd been running from. The settlement was finalized, he said carefully. The initial settlement. Not the amendments. Not the updates required when you started moving 7 figures without consulting your former business partner. Victoria pulled out another document. My attorneys have been very thorough. Outside, the sun was setting. Golden light streamed through the diner windows, casting everything in amber. Thomas Anderson was probably home by now. Melanie was likely working on the community garden's quarterly review. Shep was probably sleeping on the repaired porch. Normal. Peaceful. Safe. Victoria tapped the folder. I'm not here to punish you, Michael. I'm here to collect what's mine. What we built together. What you don't get to just give away because you had a crisis of conscience. She smiled. Cold. Precise. The smile she'd used to close hostile takeovers. Michael. I knew you couldn't stay away from a good deal for long. I'm here to talk about our settlement. She paused. And about what happens to your little charity projects if you refuse to cooperate.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely have the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.